to another Shadowproof event. We're very pleased to be joined today by Jeremy Scahill, who is a co-author of the new book that's out called The Assassination Complex. It collects the work of The Intercept over the past year, the drone papers, really digs into what's been happening with the Obama administration. So I'm happy to have Jeremy Scahill here with us. Thanks, Jeremy.
Thanks, Kevin, and thank you for all the work you guys are doing.
Yeah, so there's a very small amount of people who actually in journalism are paying attention to this on a daily basis, and I think it's very critical to keep talking about this. And so let's just begin basically with you telling us what the concept is, or what this is, the assassination complex. But I want to add a little bit of nuance to it and go a little deeper and say, you know, is this part of, are we talking about a much larger system? So, for example, when we have the explosion of watch listing and people are being intimidated and harassed and they're not allowed on flights, particularly Arab Americans, and they're having these experiences, should we see that as a symptom of, even though they're not being assassinated themselves, as a symptom of this assassination complex? Like, that's just a byproduct of it.
Well, you know, I mean, what's interesting in regard to that question is one of the things that we published in this book was a statement written by the whistleblower who provided us with the copy of the 180 plus page what's called watch listing guidance, which is really the government's rule book for watch listing, and it basically maps out a system where individuals have their data and metadata, their names, the people that they're in contact with, poured into several government databases, one of which has more than 1 million people and growing by the day. And everyone who goes into that system is preemptively categorized as a known or suspected terrorist. I, for instance, was on I was on some form of a watch list when I was doing a lot of travel to Yemen and Somalia. And you know, I would come back into the United States and I would get pulled aside and they would ask me questions about if I had any weapons training, if I had been in the military, and then when they'd start to ask me who I was visiting in Yemen and Somalia, you know, I would tell them I'm a journalist, I'm not going to answer you, I'm under no obligation to do that, you know, but I'm a white guy and I'm a journalist, and you know, I would often see you know, Arabs and other Muslims in the detention center at JFK Airport. It was, you know, it was area B of JFK Airport. I would often come in and see a room packed with people, none of whom were white. I would be called up to the desk before them, and I would be released after them. And once I decided to stay, because I was on a flight from Cairo back to JFK, and when we were sitting in the waiting area to board the plane, I was chatting with this young couple, and sort of their kids were running around. And when we landed, I noticed that this entire family was in area B of JFK when I was pulled aside. And I went up to them to try to talk to them, and then the agents came over and said, "No talking in here. You can't talk to them." And then, you know, I was processed before them. I was out, and I decided as a test case to wait and see when those people came out, and they never came out. So I don't know what happened to them. Maybe they were deported. But this was a family with small children, and you know, and they were terrified sitting in there. The reason I tell that story is because you can end up on the watch list because your phone number was discovered in the phone of someone else that they were monitoring, or someone else whose phone number was in the phone of someone else that they were monitoring. And no matter why you are in that database, you are designated as a known or suspected terrorist, a KST. Now, that information can trickle all the way to foreign governments and to state and local law enforcement in the U.S. So if someone gets pulled over by a police officer and they run a check on someone who happens to be a known or suspected terrorist, because their name is similar to someone else's, or because their phone number was in the phone of someone that the U.S. government was monitoring, then they are in a situation where a local sheriff or a sheriff's deputy is seeing, wow, this person is a known or suspected terrorist, which sounds like an extremely frightening thing. And once you're in that database, you are assigned what's called a TPN number, and it's basically like a terrorist tracking number. And every single person who has ever been killed in a drone strike intentionally, meaning the intended targets, has been assigned a TPN number. One of the things that has not gotten a lot of attention that we reported on is that 16-year-old Abdulrahman al-Awlaki, of course, the son of Anwar al-Awlaki, who was killed in a drone strike. This 16-year-old U.S. citizen kid was killed 2 weeks after his father while he was sitting having a meal with his cousins. And one of the things that our source was able to provide us with was the fact that Abdulrahman al-Awlaki, 16-year-old U.S. citizen, had a terror watch listing number assigned to him. Now, was it because they believed he was a terrorist, or was it because his father was, top on the U.S. hit list? We don't know the answer to that question. But every single person, any bit of your innocuous information that gets put into that database results in you being labeled a known or suspected terrorist. So basically what it is that is the very first step of a process that can eventually lead to your death by drone strike. But the vast majority of people in there are not people that are on the kill list. They are people who posted something on Facebook or Twitter, know people, have made phone calls abroad, or their data ends up in someone else's phone. So, the direct answer to your question is yes, this explosion of watch listing is directly related to the assassination program across the globe.
And then, still tied to this important reporting that you've been doing, currently there's a focus, at least among, I'd say, human rights organizations toward whatever the Obama administration is going to put out in terms of how they're going to count civilian casualties and what they're going to do to actually show a little bit of transparency, because they've been so secretive about this. And my question to you is based on your reporting, these drone papers, what you've had come to you from sources, how should we understand the ways that the Obama administration has been concealing civilian deaths, and the way in which that maybe this new news that we're going to get from the Obama administration might actually be an institutionalization of concealing civilian deaths?
Yeah, I mean, no doubt about it. I mean, what I think we're going to see first of all, the White House claimed that they were going to put this out over a month ago, and what they said is, we're going to be, because we're the, trademark most transparent administration in history, we're going to be putting out this unprecedented level of detail about who we have killed in drone strikes outside of declared battlefields. And there are some initial leaks that are coming out that seem to indicate that they're going to claim that they killed somewhere around 60 individuals outside of Iraq and Afghanistan, which of course is just a shockingly ridiculous number, given the credible and conservative reporting of the Bureau for Investigative Journalism, and even if you take some of the statistics from New America, which is even more conservative, the idea that there would only be a few dozen people killed is just ludicrous. But the reason why I think that the president is going to be able to say with a straight face that the number of civilians killed has been minimal is not because he is some kind of a sophisticated liar. It's because the military and the CIA have colluded to create a mathematical formula, a scientific mathematical formula for determining when civilians are killed that will almost always result in the number 0. And what I mean by that is that what the drone papers show us, these classified secret, top secret documents, is that when anyone is killed in a drone strike, or when any drone strike is conducted, there is only one objective or one target, and so each drone strike is aimed at killing one individual, not killing 5 individuals, unless it's a signature strike, which we can talk about later. So in the case of Anwar al-Awlaki, for instance, Anwar al-Awlaki was the target of a drone strike, but that drone strike also killed Samir Khan, who was a Pakistani American who had gone over to Yemen and was writing for Inspire magazine. He was killed in that strike, but he was not the target of the strike. One Republican official, a congressman at the time, said that, well, that's a twofer, like a 2-for-1 that we got him. But Samir Khan would have been categorized immediately as an EKIA, an enemy killed in action, even if they didn't know his identity. Now, in that case, you have 2 very outspoken people who were calling for global jihad, and there was not a lot of sympathy in those cases. But if you look at, for example, this horrifying strike against the wedding party in Yemen that happened a couple of Decembers ago, where more than a dozen people were killed. First of all, the person who was allegedly the target or the objective of that strike wasn't there and wasn't killed, but a tremendous number of other people were killed. And the immediate designation of all of those people was EKIA, enemies killed in action. And the standard that we reveal in these documents is that anyone whose identity is unknown is preemptively labeled an enemy killed in action unless they are clearly visible as women or small children. And the only way that that designation is lifted from the people killed is if they posthumously are proven not to have been terrorists or militants, terms that are very difficult to define because the U.S. doesn't respect international law. And so what this means is that the president's advisors can say, oh, well, we killed so-and-so in Pakistan, and there were 10 other enemies killed in action. Unless the president says, well, do we know that they were enemies? Like, who were these people? The assumption is just going to be we didn't kill any civilians. So, on a very technical level, and regardless of what you think of the morality of this policy, on a very technical level, I think all Americans should be outraged at the idea that when we're killing large numbers of people in Muslim countries around the world without knowing who they are, that we somehow are not going to pay a price for that later, that this is not going to result in blowback. That should be of great concern to everyone, regardless of where you fall on the political spectrum.
Now, the other thing that I really appreciate about this work is that, again, we have more information on what's going on in Afghanistan and how the war is being fought. But so often, we write this off. The Obama administration treats it as like the good war. Democrats write it off as the good war. We just also don't talk about it. It doesn't pop up in political discussions. We're talking about Iraq, but we don't talk about Afghanistan at all as far as what's going on. And so what were you able to learn through the source that gave you the drone papers?
Right. Well, my colleague Ryan Devereaux, who has worked with me since the Blackwater days, reported out the Afghanistan part of our story because we realized that one person would have to just do a very deep dive into those documents because they all pertained to a special operations kill capture campaign called Operation Haymaker, and what the documents say in a nutshell is that during this operation, which spanned the course of a year, but during one 5-month period that the military reviewed of this operation being conducted by JSOC, the Joint Special Operations Command, nearly 9 out of 10 of the people that were killed in mostly drone strikes, so there were some other forms of airstrikes, their identities were not known and they were classified as enemies killed in action, which means that only 10% of the people that were being killed in Afghanistan, which is a much easier battlefield in some ways to conduct drone strikes because you have bases within the country and you can send multiple assets at the same time, that they were killing a tremendous number of unknown people. And the source for the drone papers who had worked on these high-value targeting campaigns, as the Obama administration likes to call it, really described a kind of sickening system where there was a cavalier attitude about anyone who was around the cell phone of someone that they believed to be a terrorist. Because the way that the overwhelming number of cases where people are being killed in drone strikes, it's not that you're killing people, it's that you're blowing up a phone that you believe to be held by the person that you are hunting. And many drone operators and people who work on these targeting platforms never even know the actual name of the person that they're targeting. They're either given a designation like, Sandbox 1, Sandbox 2, and those are describing the SIM card or the phone that they have. And then they're given just a number on the screen, and so they know that they are tracking this series of numbers. And it's a way of dehumanizing the enemy. So the other part of what Ryan reported on regarding Operation Haymaker was that you have the most elite forces in the U.S. military being unleashed in an area of Afghanistan where there was very little actual al-Qaeda or radical violent Taliban activity. And instead, what ended up happening is that the U.S. military's most elite forces found themselves pulled into a turf war between rival factions that are based along tribal lines, not political lines, including timber wars, where fighting over natural resources. So you have these guys that that are much vaunted and sort of viewed as superheroes. They killed Osama bin Laden. They're in the middle of a battle over trees that are being cut down in Afghanistan and not killing anyone that is even a member of al-Qaeda. I think they say in there that they killed one individual in that whole year-long campaign that actually had any links to al-Qaeda.
And then another critical development in the Obama administration is this expansion of warfare in the continent of Africa, which these documents address. But I'm wondering, when you look at what is in these documents related to the assassination complex, on one hand, please talk about Somalia and what's going on, but also the utter destruction of an entire country in Libya. How is this assassination complex fueling that, especially since it seems like we're almost into like a new second or third round of warfare, where recent reports were that surveillance drones were being sent into the country to survey the spread of militias once again in Libya?
Well, I mean, this is sort of the 1-2-3 punch of the Obama doctrine, where you have you're going to utilize a lot of drones, weaponized drones, but also surveillance drones. You're going to have small numbers of covert special operations forces conducting direct actions, as they call them, meaning targeting people unilaterally, not with with foreign forces. And then you have this CIA military attempt to build up local militia that can essentially implement the agenda of their paymasters from the United States. And of course, that opens the door for huge blowback, as we've seen over and over and again throughout U.S. history. I mean, Hillary Clinton now is viewed as the presumptive nominee of the Democratic Party, although Bernie Sanders did, have quite an upset in Indiana the other night. But let's just assume that for now, Hillary does seem like she's going to be the nominee. Hillary is a legendary hawk. She is about regime change. She has much more in common on a foreign policy level with Dick Cheney than she does with her average voter or average supporter. She is part of the bipartisan war party that really has governed this country for many, many decades. She was one of the central people in the utter destruction of Libya. One of the people who was a key player in creating the conditions that led to Ambassador Stevens being killed. Hillary Clinton, if you look at the documents that we have in the book about the kill chain and how the bureaucracy of killing, what you'll notice on that is that at the very beginning of the process, you have foreign governments feeding intel into the United States, and then it goes all the way up this pyramid, and Hillary Clinton and other officials are an intricate part of signing off on these extrajudicial death sentences for people around the world that are meted out usually in the form of a drone strike. And so in Libya, in Syria, in Iraq, you now have this sort of world as a battlefield mentality underway, and JSOC is being let off the leash again. But I think the dog is now so far away from the yard in terms of that you can't even call it back. And we don't even discuss foreign policy except through a very narrow lens in this election year right now. There's too many sneezes of Donald Trump to cover, and which of his former interns was Ted Cruz sleeping with, and is John Kasich's heart still beating, and all of these things. That's what's on news all day long. But there are hardcore issues. There is not a single person running for president from either major party that is against the assassination policy, that is against the compilation of a kill list. Bernie Sanders, when asked by Chris Hayes recently at a Democratic town hall meeting, said that as it's being implemented under Obama, he supports the kill list. And Chris Hayes used the phrase the kill list, and Bernie co-signed it. The other thing is Bernie hammers away at Hillary Clinton for her regime change politics, and I think he should, and she deserves to be held completely accountable. I mean, she is a total hawkish empire politician. But Bernie Sanders' foreign policy is not that much better. It's just that he hasn't been in a position of authority the way that Hillary Clinton has as Secretary of State. Now, setting aside climate change and other issues, just looking at military policy, Bernie Sanders signed on to the Iraq Liberation Act in 1998, which was a product of the neoconservative Project for a New American Century. William Kristol, Donald Rumsfeld, Elliot Abrams, Paul Wolfowitz, these guys in 1998 wrote a letter to President Clinton that said, you need to take Iraq seriously, make it a major priority of U.S. national defense policy, and we should make regime change the law of the land. That then was translated into a bill that Bernie Sanders supported and then signed into law. That was the laying the groundwork for a point of no return in terms of invading Iraq and overthrowing Saddam Hussein. Bernie Sanders was about regime change at the very, very beginning, before Hillary Clinton even was in the Senate. Bernie Sanders then went on to support the most brutal regime of economic sanctions in modern history against Iraq. And I spent a lot of time on the ground in Iraq during that period, where the U.S. policy was to try to starve and sort of target the healthcare system of ordinary Iraqis to try to encourage them to rise up against Saddam Hussein, and it only benefited Saddam Hussein. So while Bernie Sanders has said some amazing things about various aspects of the crooked criminal nature of various U.S. foreign policies, the coups in Guatemala and Iran, it's all amazing to hear a major politician say that in the United States. But he gets away with sort of the hypocrisy of just hammering away on Hillary Clinton's regime change stuff when he was on the wrong side of decision making in history when he was a lawmaker when the Iraq stuff was first starting. So I mean, I think the fact that Bernie Sanders has come out in favor of drones, has basically said that he supports the maintenance of a kill list, and believes that these kind of targeted assassination operations make sense, means we really don't have an alternative in terms of the major political candidates on this issue. Can't hear you, Kevin. You're muted. There you go.
Just to follow up on the political question, sorry, I had my mic muted. And then we'll get back to the book. But an important political question, though, is this issue of people who I think read our work on a daily basis, people who sympathize with what we do and are out doing organizing, but do give candidates like Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton a pass when it comes to drone warfare, when it comes to regime change policies. And I think now it's even more stark because I think what you say is very significant, the fact that this election is going to become about Hillary Clinton playing the woman card, or it's going to become about the misogynistic, sleazy attacks of Donald Trump. And the worst thing that people will say is that Donald Trump's going to become president and he's going to have this assassination complex at his fingertips to wield around the world. But the fact of the matter is that there's a real thing that has to be confronted, which is the extent to which the left has made it possible for that to be available to Trump post the election.
Well, I mean, look, you and I have talked about this before, Kevin, but you cannot understate the significance of the role that President Obama has played over both terms of his administration in seeking to legitimize assassination as a central component of American policy. In the early days after 9/11, Richard Clarke, who was the counterterrorism czar under President Clinton and then carried over with the Bush people, was called to a secret hearing that's since been declassified, of a joint hearing of the House and Senate Intelligence Committees. And during that hearing, which the aim of the hearing was the Republicans were trying to blame Bill Clinton for 9/11. And so they were reviewing counterterrorism policy and why Bill Clinton didn't kill Osama bin Laden. And during this secret hearing, Richard Clarke said that there was a consensus within the Clinton administration that they did not want to give the impression of running an Israeli-style assassination ring around the world. And so the Clinton administration put in very, now in retrospect, almost like Talmudic regulations before you could actually pull the trigger in an operation that was going to kill someone like Osama bin Laden. You then fast forward to the Obama era, and we're hitting people left and right all over the globe with a very streamlined, almost scientific process for determining who lives and who dies on any given day. I mean, the popularity of drone strikes when it peaked in the 70s at one point, including self-identified liberals, and it didn't decline much at all in the question of targeting a U.S. citizen in a drone strike, I think can overwhelmingly be attributed to the fact that Obama was viewed as a transformative figure. He has tremendous support among the liberal base across the country, He's a constitutional lawyer, by training. He won the Nobel Peace Prize, and people sort of, check their conscience at the door when they're guys in power. And over the past 2 days, I've been called both a Bernie bro and a Hillary bot. And what seems to not get across to these dingbats is that I'm not a politician and I'm not a partisan. Journalists, our job is to provide people with critical information. I am not in Bernie's camp. I'm not in Hillary's camp. I'm not in Trump's camp. Real journalists will be the same journalist when there's a Democrat or a Republican in the White House, and they're not going to pull punches or withhold, facts just because someone that they may like more than the other person. That's not journalism. So do I think that Bernie has a tremendous number of great ideas? Of course I do. But I'm not Bernie's political advisor. I'm a journalist, and I think that Bernie Sanders should be whacked with criticism for the hypocrisy of going after Hillary Clinton when he also has been a part of that same machine. Hillary is low-hanging fruit to go after, because she's so hawkish. It's almost like a parody of the one-party foreign policy system in this country that Hillary Clinton is running. It's like Jeb Bush, would not be much different than Hillary Clinton on any of these issues. In fact, he may be a little less hawkish than Hillary Clinton on some of these issues. So, all of these people should be put under the microscope of scrutiny, and not because of any of this personal crap that people are talking about. We should have an audit of who they are in public, and instead the focus is often on who they're screwing in private.
To the book, the issue of secrecy, but we can tie it to what we just discussed here. One of the more absurd things that has been said in the last year by people who are whispering to media and are close to Hillary Clinton is that because her emails have information in them about the drone program, they've claimed that this information is innocuous, even though you are doing really hard work. There are people whose lives are on the line, whose livelihoods are at risk. There's the ACLU that's fighting in court to get this information released. Just talk about the secrecy element here.
First of all, Hillary Clinton has attempted to say, oh, well, Colin Powell did this when he was Secretary of State, and Madeleine Albright, did this as well. Colin Powell still has an AOL address. This is not a fair comparison. Hillary Clinton and her husband set up a private server in a bathroom at their house. This was not just something of convenience. They went to great lengths to circumvent a system that would allow her emails to be subjected to the Freedom of Information Act. And I think one of the big major drudge sirens that should be going off about the Clinton thing is the Clinton Global Foundation's role in agitating for Hillary to be using that private email. And the thing is that they are playing with words, because what Hillary Clinton is saying is that no one sent me any classified information or documents on this email. And that may or may not be true, by the way. I've heard that there actually were some actual classified documents sent, but we'll wait and see what comes out. But what we do know is that she is playing with the term classified, because when Huma Abedin or any of Hillary's other advisors, or particularly when other officials at the State Department would send Hillary Clinton information about what was happening in a variety of countries around the world, those emails were not classified. But the information in them, when put through the proper classification procedure, would certainly have been classified. So this is not a nothing burger. And this is not, Bernie Sanders said we don't give a damn about your emails. We should give a damn about our emails, if for no other reason, because of the violent double standard. People like David Petraeus and Hillary Clinton and John Brennan, all have been involved with leaking information or mishandling classified information, and almost nothing happens to any of them. And then you've got Chelsea Manning doing 30 years in a military prison. And I was saying last night to people at an event in New York, just watch the Collateral Murder video, and tell me that exposing that operation was not a tremendous act of heroism on the part of Chelsea Manning. And that's true of all sorts of documents that were published then by WikiLeaks. And yet she is repaid for what I think was an act of patriotism, because she was speaking out against these crimes being committed in the names of U.S. people. She's doing 30 years. Edward Snowden is in exile in Moscow. Tom Drake had his public life ruined. He was smeared and dragged through the mud. Bill Binney had his house raided while he was taking a shower. All of these people who were whistleblowers have been targeted in an attempt to destroy them or imprison them. And this administration is waging an all-out war against whistleblowers, and by virtue of that, against an independent press. And then you have Hillary Clinton, who is the embodiment of the establishment, running around cackling and laughing off questions about her mishandling of classified information and conspiring with her husband and his organization to set up a private server in her bathroom with the express point of circumventing the laws governing communications of a sitting Secretary of State. That is a huge scandal. But instead, we have the Espionage Act being applied to people who try to speak out about unconstitutional activity.
And I want to talk about these people, and I'll put it in this context just because of I was very moved by your tribute to Father Daniel Berrigan over on Democracy Now, and I've been reading about him, and when I think about the way in which people who are part of the liberal establishment turn these people into sort of radical pariahs that we're not supposed to follow. It's very disturbing to me, and it happens a lot to these whistleblowers, like Edward Snowden and Chelsea Manning. You get a lot of, I guess some people might call it hippie punching, but you have this happening, and it's rather disturbing. But this is a moral issue. These are people who are taking moral stands regardless of what the outcome may be. They're told that they're not going to be able to change anything, but it doesn't matter because at the when you think about it, something just has to be done to confront the system, regardless of whether the political system can be changed.
Right. I mean, Chris Hayes the other night on his show played. I think he was the only person in big corporate media to do any kind of a meaningful tribute to Daniel Berrigan, who, he and his brother Phil Berrigan were radical Catholic priests who conducted the most high-profile faith-based action of the Vietnam War era, and one of the most high-profile actions against the Vietnam War period, when they went into the customs house in Catonsville, Maryland, with 7 others, and in full view of the clerks, stole out of the cabinets, draft files that were being used to send young people to the war in Vietnam, and of course, poor people of color were disproportionately sent to that war, and then they burned them in the parking lot with homemade napalm. And then Dan Berrigan read a statement on behalf of the group, part of which read, "Our apologies, good friends, for the fracture of good order, the burning of paper instead of children." Devastating, chilling, beautiful commentary on the hypocrisy of American society, knowing that they would be arrested and put in prison for using homemade napalm against pieces of paper, while the people that were dropping napalm on villages in Vietnam were being hailed internally as heroes. The country's position on that, of course, evolved, and eventually it was viewed as the criminal war that it was by many, many people. But when Chris Hayes played a clip the other night of Dan Berrigan, it was from 1981, and it was Chris Wallace, who's the host of Fox News Sunday. The most legitimate connection he has to actual journalism is that his father was Mike Wallace, the legendary 60 Minutes journalist. But in 1981, he's interviewing Dan Berrigan, and he says to him, basically, you're a nobody now, and years ago, you were a big deal, and people, paid attention to what you were doing. Wallace doesn't mention that 1 year before that interview, Daniel Berrigan had, organized an action called the Plowshares 8, where they broke into the General Electric, or snuck into the General Electric plant in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania, and hammered on Mark 12A nuclear warhead cones, and then sparked a global movement that did that. But Dan Berrigan responds to Chris Wallace by essentially saying, who we are and why we do what we do is not tethered to the other end of a television cord. And it was just sort of like a brilliant response. Should we be concerned with wanting to be effective? Of course we should. But if you're obsessed with efficacy at the expense of doing what's right, then I think that's the problem that I think a lot of people face in our society. And it's part of the problem with just being attached to our computers all the time. The real work is done away from our electronic devices, or our electronic devices are with us when we're out somewhere else doing something. And I mean, the greatest thing about Dan Berrigan, I think, is just he showed up. He always showed up. He was always there, and and he was fond of saying, don't just say something, stand there. And I think, I think there's a lot of wisdom that younger folks who are concerned about these issues can learn by sort of studying the people that came before them, and not just looking at the last thing that was, tweeted.
And so I'll connect to that. When I think about what's happening, we have these sources that are coming forward and are willing to share information, even though they may have to flee the United States and no longer live with their families anymore, even though it may make it impossible for them to get a job ever again. But also in a different part of this, you've got the activists who, some of them are taking action, and they, when I listened to Daniel Berrigan, I sort of thought about them too, because we have people in organizations like Code Pink, or we have smaller community organizations in upstate New York that'll go to these Air Force bases that are actually taking risks and being put on these lists where they're not allowed to be near the base anymore because they're allegedly going to pose a risk to a colonel who they don't ever know, they've never ever seen. But you also have these people traveling. I know that Daniel talked about being in Vietnam when the bombs were dropping, and I thought about how Code Pink has gone to Pakistan to visit people and see the destruction there. So I just wondered if, for connecting, that part, the fact that there really are people out there challenging this.
Yeah, and I mean, in fact, during the Vietnam War, one of the things that became very common was, in addition to the raids of draft boards that took place in cities across the country, where activists would go in and destroy in some way or another the draft files, individual people would publicly burn their draft cards, and they would go to jail. And there were several cases of young people who had done this, and they felt that they were a part of a community that was doing this, and then when they ended up going to jail, they were dropped by everybody and kind of just left in solitary, basically, in jail, and came out very shattered and destroyed people, because it's everyone will cheer on someone doing the big action, but then when they have to pay up personally and they end up going to jail, who's there to continue to support those people when they do it? And that's why I think that the lives of Daniel and Phil Berrigan are so interesting, because they had a commitment to trying to spend a solid percentage of their life behind bars, not just with their comrades in resistance, but with people that were convicted of everyday crimes or of violent crimes, because those people are also a part of our society. And I think that it's been disgraceful the way that the New York Times has handled Chelsea Manning's case. They splashed those files and stories about the WikiLeaks files all over the front page for a sustained period of time, and they had to be shamed by you and Alexa O'Brien and others, independent, low-funded journalists were doing the daily coverage of that trial, and the New York Times had to be shamed into covering it. And the CNN cameraman or producer was sleeping all the time, according to Alexa's tweets. I mean, I love following how the one corporate journalist there can't even stay awake during the proceedings. But that's a commentary on why we need independent media, and also why we need to support whistleblowers and amplify their voices. And when the government comes for them, speaking out and being there is so essential. You can't just drop people, like litter on the ground, when you have used the information that they've given to you at great risk to publish news stories. You have to be there for your sources.
So as we wrap, I just wanted to give you the opportunity, if you had any final thoughts, anything from the book that you wanted to make sure you said before we ended this. And again, thank you for your time.
No, I mean, it's my pleasure, Kevin. And again, thank you for the work that you and your team are doing. And I really look forward to seeing what Shadowproof is going to become, and the kinds of stories that you guys are going to be breaking. I guess what I would say just at the end of the day about our book is that it was it was a huge collective effort, and there are a lot of people, as you know, who are a part of great reporting that don't get the byline. They research for you, they help you with logistical stuff, they lay your website out, they do all of these things, and so many people worked on it. And what we tried to do was create a, it's only like 280 pages long, but we tried to create a sort of living document that people could use as a reference to understand the watch listing process and what we understand from inside, from whistleblowers, about how the assassination complex works, especially because we know that President Obama is going to try to historically revise what actually happened over the past 2 administrations. And then the other thing I would say is just, for people, when there are cases where whistleblowers come under or come in the sights of the sniper scope of the American state, that people be there for them and that they stand up and they not drop them. And Chelsea Manning still needs people's voice and support. It's one thing to be there when the act of resistance is ongoing and it's in the media. It's when the cameras go away and the sentence is handed down that you really see who's with you and who's not.
Well, thank you, Jeremy. And I expect that throughout this general election, we're going to see Hillary Clinton trying to prove to us that she's a smarter warrior-in-chief than Donald Trump will ever be. So we'll need your clarity on these issues of the drone war and assassination complex. So thanks again for joining us.
I mean, it's great, having choosing between a fascist and a politician of the empire. It's just a wonderful selection we have in this country.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks. Take care.